Welcome to Agri-Pulse Newsmakers, where we aim to take you to the heart of ag policy. I'm Spencer Chase. Our guest this week is former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who joins us to discuss his thoughts on the role of food in the country's national security framework. But first, here's this week's headlines. Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack announced 3 of the programs that will be given funding under USDA's Partnerships for Climate-Smart Commodities program. The announced projects are meant to offer a flavor of a broader announcement USDA is expected to make in about 2 weeks. The program received more than $20 billion in requests, but USDA only has $1 billion in funding available. Vilsack also announced some steps the department is taking, as some farmers could face foreclosure on USDA loans as early as this fall. He says the department may begin providing some newly authorized debt relief over a series of steps to address the immediate need for help. About 22% of loans are delinquent or have been delinquent. And finally, the White House announced a conference on hunger, nutrition, and health will be held September 28th. It will be the first time such an event is convened in more than 53 years. The conference is expected to address a variety of issues, including the future of SNAP eligibility rules. Some of the long-term goals include ending hunger in the U.S. by 2030 and getting Americans to adopt healthy diets, which are linked to lower healthcare costs. The event takes on special importance as the country reflects on the challenges the food system has faced in recent years due to everything from the COVID-19 pandemic to the invasion of Ukraine. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo spoke earlier this week with my colleague Phil Brasher and said in his previous roles, food security had to be top of mind.
It was part of everything that we did in the time of at the CIA. We were very interested in global food security issue, understanding who was doing what and how. And of course, as Secretary of State, we had USAID, which was responsible for assisting nations around the world with some of their most significant food security challenges. I worked with Governor Beasley on the World Food Program very closely, and it was deeply connected to American national security, not just through the trade relationships, which ag matters an awful lot to the agriculture community, but these food security issues were paramount. We saw it before the pandemic, we saw it after the pandemic. It's continuing to this day. When you'd meet with world leaders, they would want to talk about 2 things that are very connected. They would talk about energy and food. We all know in the agriculture supply chain, this is all driven by energy costs, right? Natural gas, ammonia, the entire food supply chain depends on the capacity to provide energy. These leaders around the world can't turn the lights on in their countries, and they are very worried about the water and energy they need to produce food for themselves. And then second, they wanted the United States to understand their food security needs and for us to be able to access their markets in ways that would benefit not only their local ag communities in terms of our technology and our capabilities and our ability to produce more crops on fewer acres, but they also wanted to make sure that we understood the needs that they would have, not only now, but take a country like Nigeria, that'll be the most highly populated country in the world. These food security issues were at the top of the list for all of us, the senior leaders at the State Department and leaders in the White House as well.
Let me ask you about in that vein, our ability to protect ourselves, our food system from cyber attacks. How well protected are we at this point? During your administration, you all saw some attacks on our large meat processing facilities.
Yeah, these cyber threats are everywhere. They're certainly in the food supply chain, food security systems, but it's a broader challenge than that. I would say from a food security perspective, it varies. So the financial community's done a really good job. So the folks who provide the capital for agriculture have done a pretty good job. The energy guys, in terms of delivering, are in a better place today. But for small companies, it's harder. I ran one. I ran 2 small companies in Kansas. Very difficult to protect yourself against a nation state actor or even someone like a rogue element inside of Russia or North Korea. Those are national undertakings. We're probably in a better place today than we were 5 years ago, but I do worry because offense is easier to play than defense. And so I tell small agriculture businesses, I tell small companies in every industry, the best solution is simply to have a redundant system. You're going to be attacked. It's going to happen. The bad day is almost certain to be upon you. make sure that you have the capability to keep your core operations running, even if the primary systems that you operate off of come under attack. If you do that, if you have some level of redundancy in your system, and it's not cheap to do, I get it, but the more redundancy you can put in place, the less risk there is to you and your business, and then more broadly to us as a nation and our capacity to feed not only America, but the world.
We'll be right back to continue our conversation with former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo right after this.
Regenerative poultry production is a process by which nature can actually recapture and restore the energy that is being taken out of a space.
Farm Credit helped Rahi build his dream of regenerative poultry farming and encouraging fellow immigrants to find community in agriculture.
Nothing beats a farm. I'm just pursuing happiness.
Learn more at farmcredit.com/beginning.
Farmers are always there for each other. We shed tears together, we celebrate together, but we also grow together. Farm Bureau is the largest general farm organization in the country. We have the farmers' back. If you're a farmer and you're not a member, we would welcome you into our Farm Bureau family. And if you want to know more about agriculture, come be part of this great family.
Welcome back. With some grain now being shipped out of Ukraine, we asked Secretary Pompeo about what could happen from here and how he thinks the Biden administration is doing when it comes to maintaining the global food supply in light of the war.
Yeah, well, it's a mess. The first duty of a president of the United States is deterrence, to deter exactly what happened, Putin's aggression. I get asked all the time, would this have happened if we were still there? I can't prove it, we're not, but it didn't happen on our watch. The reason we need strong American economy, the reason we need capable food suppliers to deliver product around the world is to convince other nations that the cost of disconnecting from us will be too great. And clearly this administration lost that ability to deter and hasn't been able yet to come back over the top. I'm encouraged. The weapon systems they're providing to the Ukrainians, I think, are constructive, useful, but they have been too small, too slow. Clearly, like just as a matter of fact, not enough to convince Putin to go back in the box. As a result of that, you see this risk. Kansas, we know red winter wheat. We all know the products that come out of not only Ukraine, but Western Russia as well, and that the capacity to move through the Sea of Azov, Black Sea, through the Straits of Bosphorus to get that grain out has proven very unreliable. And that has deep implications, right? We'll have higher food prices, which ag usually likes, right? Higher crop prices, good generically. But the truth is, we all know that the cost of inputs is through the roof. I saw what the Europeans were paying for natural gas just this past week, and for urea and ammonia. This will drive enormous costs to every family in the world who's trying to just figure out how to feed itself. I give the Biden administration an A for effort, but to date they have not demonstrated their capacity to create the systems, the alliances, the partnerships to ensure that we can continue to deliver affordable food to the American people in the years ahead. I suspect this conflict in Ukraine will continue for some time, as I see absolutely no reason that Vladimir Putin will ever give up his quest for dominance, not only of Ukraine, but of what he views as greater Russia. And that doesn't stop at the Ukrainian boundary either.
Well, I wanted to ask you about Putin's endgame here. Is he going to keep this going until he can take over Ukraine? Is that his endgame? And
Yeah,
how long could that take?
Absolutely. No, that's his end game. It's the reason he did it. He, just like I believe Kansas is part of America, he believes Moldova and Belarus and these Central Asian countries that were part of the Soviet bloc and Ukraine, he believes they're part of Russia, just the same way. That's hard thought for us to understand. But just think about your home state, and you view it as part of the union, he views that as part of his. When you have that central thesis, when you understand the world that way, you don't stop. And so you may pause. You may use different tools, you may use energy, you may use food, you may use your military, but you don't stop. And so there's no reason until we begin to impose serious costs on Putin and those around him in a way that convinces them that the risk is destabilizing for them and is too great for them to bear, then until he sees that, he's going to continue to plunk away. And I've seen no evidence that the administration has any theory of the case other than what it looks like now. Innocent Ukrainian lives being lost every day, and a roughly stalemated conflict along these various lines of conflict inside of Ukraine in the south and in the east.
Let me turn to China for a minute. In a speech earlier this year, you described China as actually the greatest menace to the United States. Do you still feel that true? And how do we confront China, continue to confront China on human rights issues, or it's Taiwan, other concerns that we have, and at the same time maintain that market, which is, as you know, is very critical for U.S. agriculture?
No, I still believe that the Chinese Communist Party is the single threat to the United States from outside of the country. The greatest threat to America is actually the teachers' unions, but that's a different story altogether. The Chinese Communist Party is intent on having your kids and grandkids live in a very different America. And when we talk about losing markets, it may not be, we often think that's because some president will put some tariff or some trade barrier. The truth is the Chinese may choose to do it. We've seen evidence of that. They stopped purchasing ginseng. They very closely control who they buy their soybeans from. It may well be that this market will be lost, not because of anything that America does. We love to trade. We want to trade on a fair and reciprocal basis. The Chinese Communist Party doesn't know what a private company is and uses its purchasing of every product for its own national security objectives. And so they could decide they're going to stop buying product from us. So we shouldn't think of, when we think about losing that market, we shouldn't think about, boy, will some American president force us to abandon it. It could be that the person who forces us to abandon that market is Xi Jinping. What should we do? How do we push back against this? For decades, the United States has let the Chinese grow their economy on the back of the American farmer and the American worker. There's no doubt about that. You need only talk to folks in the seed industry to know that the Chinese stole the technology, the IP, all of the things that have made us such a productive agriculture community here at home. The Chinese just stole it. We spend billions of dollars in research and they come work in our laboratories and steal the damn stuff. That's stupid. That's un-American. It is naive. It is foolish. So we have to get serious about confronting them. At the University of Iowa, at the University of Kansas, and at the University of Nebraska, we still have Chinese students getting their PhDs in agroeconomics and ag science. If you think they're there because they want to become good Iowa farmers, I have news for you. They're there to steal our stuff, take it back to China, and become independent from American agriculture production. And so the way to protect those markets is to do what we've done for an awfully long time with respect to nearly every country except China. We need to demand that they behave in the way the world system does. That means the trade rules have to be identical and reciprocal. It means they have to be fair. It means if we have access to their markets, they should have access to ours. And when we don't, they shouldn't get ours. Investments should be absolutely reciprocal. If we do those things, we will convince the Chinese leadership that they can't walk on America, that they can't steal the stuff from America to benefit their own citizenry. And we will protect American agriculture in ways that, frankly, this is not partisan. For at least the last 24 years, no presidential administration was prepared to protect American ag. And we allowed the Chinese to make enormous advancements that will, in the long run, hurt us an awful lot here at home.
But the Biden administration has kept on the tariffs that President Trump imposed. What more can be done, has to be done?
Those tariffs are tiny. In the scheme of the overall trade relationship between the United States and China, they are very, very small. And the Chinese have clearly demonstrated their capacity to adapt to that narrow set of tariffs. Look, tariffs are a tough pill to swallow for all of us. We like to trade, but we have to trade in a way that is reasonable and fair to American agriculture. And so there are scores of tools we can use. I would start with capital markets. Today, if a Chinese company wants to list on the New York Stock Exchange and raise capital, imperative to grow a business, we all know this, they can do it and we don't get to look at their books. If an American company, if you wanted to list your company on the New York Stock Exchange, you'd have to open your books. That's crazy to tell an American they have more difficult rules to create a capital base for them to grow their company, to favor the Chinese over the American. That's just nutty. And we have done it for an awfully long time. I could go through a list of 20 issues in tech, in finance, in ag, where we, with the World Trade Organization rules, we still treat China like a developing nation. What is probably now the world's largest economy, or at least tied for first, we treat like a developing nation. We lost the bubble, and we became so fearful that we were going to lose access to these markets that we couldn't demand that the Chinese actually treat American agriculture fairly. This is what we began. We only just began to do it. Our tariff actions were imperfect. There were actually, in my judgment, there were tools that would have been more effective. But make no mistake about it, the mission set, the objective was noble and right and important to protect American agriculture into the next century.
Well, we'll have to end on that note. We're out of time. Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for being with us. Look forward to continuing this conversation.
I look forward to it too. Yes, sir. Thank you. Bless you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
We'll be right back to hear from this week's panel, but first, our Hannah Pegel checks in with this week's featured farmhand.
Grant Leslie is a partner at FGS Global and is the head of the firm's food practice. In her career, she has served as a senior advisor to Secretary Vilsack at USDA during the Obama administration and has a decade of Senate experience working on food and agriculture issues. In a recent Meet the Farmhand interview, we sat down with Leslie to learn more about the lessons she learned while working at USDA under Secretary Vilsack, including some of the advice Vilsack gave her. Take a look.
Don't pretend to know something that you don't know. It is okay if you don't know something. We all don't know everything, but it is really important to, if you don't, do research, talk to people, figure it out. And actually that exercise, I think, in and of itself can really help you get a lot of different perspectives and learn a lot of things so that you can then, synthesize that and figure out what the best path forward is.
Leslie also shares the story of opening a letter that made some scary news while she was working on Capitol Hill for Senator Tom Daschle, and reflects on what she learned from her mentor, Bart Chilton. Head to Agri-Pulse.com to watch her full Meet the Farmhand interview. For Agri-Pulse, I'm Hannah Pegel.
Every morning, American corn farmers roll their sleeves up and start the work of growing a better future, one bushel at a time, with America's crop. A better future made possible by their unmatched sustainability practices and the extraordinary benefits and uses of corn throughout the global economy. And the National Corn Growers Association proudly supports and advocates for all they do, year in and year out.
At Clean Fuels Alliance America, we're working toward a future of clean energy now that will make our members proud. We serve as the clean fuels industry's primary organization for technical, environmental, and quality assurance programs, and are the strongest voice for its advocacy, communications, and market development. With industry-leading programs and incentives, Clean Fuels Alliance America is actively moving the clean fuels industry forward toward a brighter future.
Welcome back to Agri-Pulse Newsmakers, where we're excited to be joined by a dynamic panel to continue our discussion on that intersection between food security and national security, specifically in the context of global hunger. Joined this week by Kip Tom of Tom Farms, Barron Segar with the World Food Program USA, and Phil Karsting with OFW Law. Gentlemen, appreciate the time here this morning. Kip, I want to go to you first because a lot of the world hunger conversations really intensified with that invasion of Ukraine, and we have seen in the last couple of months an agreement to allow some grain to move out of Ukraine, but it takes a long time from agreements to actual food in the needs of the hungry. Wondering, as we see some of that grain start to move out of the country, are we seeing any kind of tangible dent in global hunger concerns at this point?
We are seeing some relief. Yesterday was a good example. We received some shipments of grain out of Ukraine into Djibouti, and it's fastly making its way across the Sahel of Africa. So we remain optimistic. We realize agreements like this convened between the country of Turkey, Ukraine, Russia, and of course the UN organization, that hopefully will remain in place. We'll continue to move that grain out. But it's got a twofold consequences. Obviously we want to alleviate food insecurity issues across the developing nations that are food insecure, but at the same time, we want to make sure that we have the ability to move that grain out to allow farmers in Ukraine to have the incomes they need to reinvest in a crop in 2023 and beyond. But we have some real concerns about that. given the ships are going back in empty with no resources for those farmers to build up stocks for a 2023 crop.
Well, and Barron, I want to bring you into the fold here because you're someone, just in the nature of your position, that's going to be tracking global hunger concerns a lot more closely than most. I wonder, as someone who is looking at those concerns, what are the indicators that you're watching that you'll be able to kind of discern whether or not real tangible progress is being made?
So we're clearly sounding the alarm bells. We know that since 2019, twice as many people are suffering from hunger. So we're looking at 345 million people around the world, which is just staggering. I think what I'm also keeping my eye on is the 50 million people who are on the verge of famine and will die without these supplies. I know there's a lot of discussion around Ukraine and the war and inflation, but I would remind the audience that, as I would refer to them as the four C's of crisis. And yes, there are costs that are rising. In Ukraine, we're seeing conflict. By the way, we're also seeing conflict in places like Ethiopia, South Sudan. You've got the implications still ongoing from COVID and clearly climate. The world is heating up. We're seeing that in the United States. We're seeing extreme weather events happening. So again, climate, COVID, conflict, cost. And then, just what Kip said, for the World Food Program on the 16th of August, we had a cargo ship that left with 23,000 metric tons for Ethiopia and another 60,000 metric tons heading to Yemen. The problems are not alleviated overnight. It takes a while for the supply chain to correct itself, but we're hopeful that there's progress being made.
Well, and Phil, I mean, keeping your perspective in mind here as well, because someone with experience at USDA and the Foreign Agricultural Service there, wondering as we look kind of at the the intersection of those hunger concerns, geopolitical instability, as well as agricultural trade for American producers, what have we typically seen in terms of the relationship between that agricultural trade and the geopolitical instability that we're seeing right now?
Well, obviously, volatility of this nature tests everyone's agility, both on the philanthropic side as well as on the commercial side. And I think one of the things that USDA and others have tried to do is to make sure that people don't take irrational steps to restrict trade, because that can just have a lot of unintended cascading consequences. And so I think that's an emphasis that has been there on the commercial side. But obviously, as Barron said, it's going to take a while for this to sort out, if it ever does. And even if it does, we have climate issues that are going to be with us for some time. So it really is a moment when we should do a lot of introspection and figure out better ways to expand global food security, to find substantive ways to encourage investment in places where they need better food security, and create systems that just deliver more for the people that need it.
We'll be right back with more from our panel right after this.
Agriculture Future of America is a nonprofit building transformational leaders in food and agriculture. AFA prepares college students to join the workforce as innovative and engaged young professionals who will shape the future of agriculture. Head to agfuture.org to find out how you can get involved.
Welcome back. Countries around the world are working to react to the invasion of Ukraine and its corresponding impact on global hunger. Barron Segar with the World Food Program USA says he's been happy with the American response.
The American government has clearly stepped up to the plate. I know the World Food Program is receiving distributions of about $5 billion. We are very grateful for that. That is a significant increase from the prior year. We have to remind ourselves that there's enough food in the world to feed those who are hungry. The issues are, how do we get it there, given particularly the crises we're finding with COVID and conflict. The World Food Program is seeing our costs go up by 25%. And I would also just say, we're very grateful to the American farmers. We are very proud to partner with companies like Cargill and John Deere and ADM and AGCO. And just last year, the World Food Program purchased about 1 million tons of food from U.S. farmers. The last thing I'll say, which I always have to remind myself about when you think about inflation, which is what the world is talking about. In the United States, I think the average person spends about 10% of their salary on food. But when you go into a less developed country where the World Food Program is working, say you've got somebody earning $1.90 a day, 50% of their income goes to buying food. So when their costs go up, they unfortunately have to decide. Imagine a mother having to decide which child gets fed and which child does not get fed.
Well, and I want to shift gears a little bit here and look at sort of more of the production side of the global food picture. Kip, I was at the Farm Progress Show in Iowa earlier this week and was talking with a number of producers kind of scratching their heads, wondering what the picture is going to look like for fertilizer availability for the upcoming growing season. And that is not a challenge that is really unique to the American producer at this point. Wondering what your assessment is on where things stand in terms of global fertilizer availability for producers and what that's going to mean in the global hunger picture.
As farmers and in my service as a U.S. ambassador, we always wanted to take this look around the corner. What's next? What are we doing that we can have a positive impact to make sure that we can feed that world? And as I look forward to 2023, I look at failed energy policy in the United States, raising the price of natural gas. I look at the same occurring in Europe, where natural gas is nearly 7 times greater than it was just a few years ago. I also look at where, because that natural gas is so high priced, they've throttled back their production in Europe. So now we're going to start exporting nitrogen from the United States to Europe. And then I look at our dependence on nations that aren't our friends, Russia, for our source of ammonia, our source for potassium, Belarus. I look at China for phosphorus. I think this is a time the United States needs to look really hard and convene minds to get together and say, what can we do to make sure we are the most durable and reliable agricultural system in the world? We're going to come through this. We're going to find the resources to be able to afford to plant a crop in the United States. But I can tell you, you get into countries like Brazil, Argentina, other bread baskets in the world, and Ukraine, who will probably end up being a net food importer at the end of the day in a year or two from now. Those are really grave concerns in the terms of food security around the world. And as Barron said, this affects those that can least afford it the most. So it's time we have rational minds to get together, have pragmatic decisions be made, and not follow these ideological beliefs of how to promote green energy policy and such. We all believe in cleaning up the environment, being more insensitive to our carbon footprint and all that, but let's do it in a sensible manner that we can continue, that we don't have these problems that we're having around the world today. Again, we need to look at our food system in the United States and make sure that we remain durable. Bring these supply chains back to the United States, to our friends and allies around the world, because our own national security is at risk.
Well, and Phil, I want to wrap up with you, and Kip kind of touched on what I was looking to discuss with you here as we close out our conversation. Wondering, in your assessment, what the U.S. Do you think has learned, or perhaps should learn, from this conflict, and how do you think that will impact, American food policy and farm policy going forward?
I think if you go up 50,000 feet, you look at the importance of maintaining alliances in the big scheme of things. I think that's been hugely important and a lesson to learn. And as Kip noted, it's important to really take a sober approach to that and forming those alliances and making sure that our allies understand the importance of agriculture, that everybody, we don't all have to be on the same page. But we need to have really serious conversations about things that are pragmatic and make sense and work. So that, I think, is the biggest sort of geopolitical takeaway from a lot of this. The second part of your question, I'm sorry.
How do you think that will impact farm policy going forward then?
Farm policy going forward, we'll be writing a new farm bill next year. Nobody knows exactly who's going to be holding all the gavels in that process. But farm bills are often written in somewhat less ideological way, and so I'm hopeful that we will come forward with a farm bill that takes into account some of the challenges, the things we need to do on energy and resilience and climate and sustainability. So we look forward to that process.
Well, obviously a number of things for us to keep an eye on here as we continue to watch this global hunger picture unfold, as well as the American farm policy role in it. But I think that's going to do it for today's conversation. So Kip, Phil, and Barron, thanks for joining us. We'll be right back with more Agri-Pulse Newsmakers, but first, our Hannah Pagel takes a look at a major American nutrition program in this week's Ag by the Numbers.
USDA's nutrition program for women, infants, and children, also known as WIC, has been especially helpful to low-income women as the country faces an infant formula shortage and there are many more hungry mouths to feed. In an average month, more than 6 million people participate in the program. As COVID hit in 2020, WIC waivers made the program and its services more accessible, giving families the ability to enroll and receive services over the phone or via telehealth. As a result, WIC participation has remained fairly steady and actually increased slightly during the pandemic. From February 2020 to February 2021, the latest available month of data, WIC participation jumped 2.1% to 6.2 million people, according to the Food Research and Action Center. The change in WIC participation varies widely between regions and states, with more enrollment in about half the states across the country. Keep in mind, WIC participation today is low by historical standards. As you can see here, participation in 2019 was 32% below the record high of 9.2 million people in fiscal year 2010. Looking ahead, USDA recently announced an extension to a series of waivers that would provide WIC families with additional formula options through the end of the year. The waivers were previously set to expire at the end of September. We can also expect nutrition programs to be in the spotlight as the White House Conference on Hunger, Nutrition, and Health is expected to take place later in September. For this week's Ag by the Numbers, I'm Hannah Pagel.
Did you know Agri-Pulse has all your favorite podcasts, including Open Mic, Newsmakers, and Drive Time? Take us wherever you go. Subscribe at agripulse.com or on Spotify, Google Play, or Apple Podcasts.
Thanks again for tuning in for another episode of Agri-Pulse Newsmakers. Before we let you go, here's what's on the horizon for the upcoming Labor Day week. The Senate Finance Committee will meet Wednesday to vote on the nomination of Doug McCaleb to be the next Chief Ag Negotiator at the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative. The Senate Environment and Public Works Committee will also meet that day to discuss several pieces of legislation, including a livestock emissions bill. Also on Wednesday, USDA will release its annual report on citrus fruit crops. As always, keep an eye on agripulse.com for the latest farm policy news in Washington and across the country. For Agri-Pulse Newsmakers, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one. Newsmakers is a production of Agri-Pulse Communications. For more ag policy news, visit agripulse.com. You can also find our new content on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to follow Agri-Pulse and our correspondents on social media to get breaking news and more.